Hey guys, tonight we're going to pull back the curtain on a truly terrifying aspect of medieval Europe, one that lurked in every shadow, stalked every village, and claimed millions of lives without mercy. We often picture knights in shining armor and grand castles, but for the vast majority of people, life was short, brutal, and often ended in agonizing pain. Tonight, we're going to dive into the horrifying diseases of medieval Europe, and I mean truly horrifying. We're talking about pandemics, disfigurement, and a level of suffering that, frankly, you probably wouldn't survive a single season of. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported to a bustling, yet often grimy, medieval European city, perhaps London or Paris, around the mid-14th century. The streets are narrow, packed with people, horses, and the ubiquitous stench of human and animal waste. The air is thick with the murmur of voices, the cries of vendors, and an underlying sense of unease. You are no longer a modern observer, you are a peasant, a merchant, or a humble monk, living in a world perpetually shadowed by unseen killers. And the first, most terrifying disease that sweeps through this world is the Black Death, Europe's grim reaper. Imagine the year 1347. Whispers begin to trickle in from the east. A terrifying plague is spreading, wiping out entire populations in Asia. These aren't just rumors, they are premonitions of an unimaginable catastrophe. By 1348, the plague has arrived on European shores, carried by fleas on rats, inadvertently transported on merchant ships from the bustling trade routes. You see the first signs in your city, people falling ill with bewildering speed, their bodies ravaged by symptoms no one has ever witnessed before. The disease manifests in two terrifying forms, though some accounts describe more. The most common and infamous is bubonic plague. Its name comes from the most horrifying symptom, the buboes. Imagine developing painful, swollen lymph nodes, often in your groin, armpits, or neck. These buboes can grow to the size of an apple or an egg, becoming hard, black, and incredibly agonizing. You'd see them on your neighbors, then on your friends, and finally, on yourself. The pain would be excruciating, a constant throbbing agony that would make even simple movement unbearable. Accompanying the buboes are a sudden onset of high fever, chills, extreme weakness, and severe headache. Within days, sometimes hours, your body would succumb. The skin might develop dark blotches, gangrene could set in, turning fingers and toes black. Death was often swift and agonizing, a brutal end that left survivors reeling in terror. The other, even more terrifying, form was pneumonic plague. This variant directly attacked the lungs, causing severe pneumonia. Imagine coughing up blood, your breath ragged and short, your lungs burning with infection. This form was highly contagious, spreading directly from person to person through airborne droplets, making it even more terrifying in crowded medieval cities. A single cough from an infected person could doom an entire room of people. You'd witness families being wiped out, one by one, their final breaths exhaling the very contagion that would claim their loved ones. The speed and scale of the Black Death were unprecedented. It swept across Europe with horrifying efficiency, claiming lives regardless of age, gender, or social status. Healthy individuals would fall ill in the morning and be dead by nightfall. The death tolls were staggering. It's estimated that the Black Death wiped out 30–50% of Europe's entire population in just a few short years, roughly 75 to 200 million people. Imagine half the people you know, your family, your friends, your entire village, vanishing in a terrifying wave of sickness and death. There was no understanding of the disease's cause. Medieval physicians, limited by their knowledge of humors and their lack of understanding of germ theory, were utterly powerless. They tried bizarre remedies, bloodletting, concoctions of herbs and crushed emeralds, or even flagellating themselves to appease God. Nothing worked. The disease was seen as divine punishment, an unstoppable force. You'd live in constant fear, waiting for the buboes to appear, knowing that once they did, your fate was almost certainly sealed. The sheer terror and despair were palpable, turning entire regions into landscapes of death and silence. The impact was catastrophic. Villages were emptied, fields lay fallow, trade collapsed. Society itself began to unravel under the relentless onslaught of death. The Black Death was not just a medical catastrophe, it was a profound social, economic, and psychological shock that reshaped the entire continent, leaving an indelible mark of fear and loss for generations. It makes you feel incredibly grateful for antibiotics and public health, doesn't it? You've witnessed the horrifying devastation of the Black Death, a grim introduction to medieval disease. But even in times without a raging plague, another ubiquitous viral killer stalked every corner of medieval Europe, often leaving its victims disfigured for life: smallpox, the pox that marred life. This wasn't always a swift killer like the plague, but its constant presence and terrifying aftermath ensured widespread suffering and a pervasive fear of its characteristic lesions. Imagine yourself in a medieval village, perhaps a generation after the worst of the Black Death has passed. Life has returned to its grinding rhythm, but an underlying anxiety persists. You hear whispers of a fever spreading, particularly among children. Soon, the familiar, terrifying symptoms appear. Smallpox, caused by the variola virus, was an endemic disease in medieval Europe, meaning it was constantly present within the population. Unlike the sudden, episodic outbreaks of plague, smallpox was a predictable, if dreaded, part of life. Most people would contract it at some point, often in childhood. The initial symptoms were deceptively mundane: a sudden onset of high fever, headaches, severe body aches, and vomiting. You'd feel utterly miserable, your muscles aching, your head throbbing. But then, after a few days, the true horror would begin to emerge: a characteristic rash. Imagine small, red spots appearing first in your mouth and throat, making swallowing excruciatingly painful. Then, these spots would erupt all over your face, then spread rapidly to your limbs and trunk. These red spots would quickly evolve into raised bumps, papules, then fill with a thick, opaque fluid, becoming distinct blisters, vesicles. These vesicles would be intensely itchy and painful. Imagine your entire body covered in these pus-filled sores, each one a torment. The fluid inside would then turn yellowish, and the blisters would grow larger, becoming deeply pitted pustules. Your face, in particular, would be a mass of these agonizing lesions, swelling to the point where your eyes might be swollen shut, making you temporarily blind. The smell would be sickening, a fetid odor emanating from the infected pustules, a distinct smell that survivors would remember for the rest of their lives. The itching would be unbearable, but scratching would only worsen the disfigurement, pushing the infection deeper into your skin. If you survived, and many didn't, with mortality rates often reaching 30% or more in unvaccinated populations, the pustules would eventually crust over and form scabs. These scabs would then fall off, leaving behind the most enduring and terrifying legacy of smallpox: deep, permanent pockmarks and scars, particularly on the face. Imagine your reflection after battling smallpox. Your face, once smooth, now a landscape of pitted scars, a permanent record of your agonizing ordeal. These pockmarks were not just cosmetic, they were a social stigma, a visible mark that immediately identified you as a survivor of the disease. While ubiquitous, they could affect marriage prospects, social acceptance, and even employment. For many, smallpox was the pox that truly marred life, even if you survived it. While medieval medical texts often describe the visible symptoms of smallpox, the specific variations in its virulence and mortality rates across different epidemics and regions are still debated by modern epidemiologists. Smallpox was highly contagious, spreading through airborne droplets from coughs and sneezes, as well as through contact with the fluid from the pustules or contaminated clothing and bedding. In crowded medieval towns and villages, with poor sanitation and close living quarters, the disease spread with terrifying efficiency. You'd see entire families afflicted, children crying in agony, their bodies covered in sores, their faces swollen and unrecognizable. There was no understanding of vaccination. Medieval physicians were powerless against smallpox, just as they were against the plague. They might try herbal remedies to reduce fever or soothing poultices for the pustules, but nothing could stop the course of the disease. Prayer, charms, and superstitious practices were often the only recourse for desperate families. You'd live in fear of smallpox, knowing that it was almost inevitable you or your loved ones would contract it, and that its outcome, whether death or lifelong disfigurement, was entirely in the hands of fate. The prevalence of smallpox meant that most medieval populations would have been constantly exposed, leading to a degree of herd immunity among survivors. But new generations were always vulnerable, and any unexposed population like the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Tragically, when Europeans later arrived, would be completely devastated by its introduction. For medieval Europeans, smallpox was a grim, ever-present reality, shaping faces and lives for centuries. So, as you reflect on the challenges of medieval life, remember the constant threat of smallpox, the pox that marred life. It was a terrifying, disfiguring disease that left few untouched, a silent testament to the horrors of ancient contagions and the fragility of human existence in a world without modern medicine. It truly makes you appreciate smooth skin and effective vaccinations, doesn't it? You've explored the disfiguring terror of smallpox, but while some diseases struck swiftly or left their mark universally, another horrifying medieval affliction brought with it not just physical decay, but profound social isolation and an agonizingly slow demise: leprosy, social stigma, slow decay. To be diagnosed with leprosy in medieval Europe was often to be condemned to a living death, cast out from society and forced to endure a horrifying physical deterioration. Imagine yourself in a medieval town or village, perhaps in the 13th century. You notice a neighbor, a familiar face, slowly developing strange symptoms. First, perhaps a persistent numbness in their extremities, then discolored patches of skin, or perhaps nodules appearing on their face and body. Soon, the terrifying whispers begin, "Leper." This single word carried immense power, triggering an immediate and profound social condemnation. Leprosy, caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium leprae, is a slow-progressing disease that primarily affects the skin, nerves, upper respiratory tract, eyes, and testes. It is not highly contagious, requiring prolonged, close contact, but in the medieval mind, it was seen as a terrifying, highly infectious, and often divinely inflicted curse. The physical symptoms, while not always immediately fatal, were horrifyingly visible and progressively debilitating. Imagine the gradual loss of sensation in your fingers and toes, leading to unhealed injuries and eventual deformities. Nodules and lesions would form on the face, thickening the skin and distorting features, giving rise to the characteristic leonine facies, a lion-like appearance. The eyebrows and eyelashes might fall out. In advanced stages, the disease could lead to the loss of fingers and toes, not from direct decay, but from repeated injuries to numb extremities, coupled with secondary infections that would cause the affected parts to literally fall off. Imagine your own body slowly disintegrating, limb by limb, without pain, but with horrifying visual evidence. But perhaps even worse than the physical decay was the social stigma and forced isolation. Upon diagnosis, often by a village priest or a local authority rather than a trained physician, you would be immediately excommunicated from the community. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. You would undergo a grim funeral mass, symbolizing your death to society. You would then be given a cloak, a hood, gloves, and a clapper, a wooden rattle to announce your presence, warning others to keep their distance. You would be forced to leave your home, your family, and everything you knew. Your new dwelling would be a leprosarium or lazaretto, a segregated colony located far outside the city walls or isolated from villages. These were not hospitals in the modern sense, but rather places of confinement, often bleak and poorly supplied. Imagine the profound despair of being torn from your loved ones, forced to live out your days among others, suffering the same agonizing fate. Hearing the constant clatter of clappers from fellow inmates, a grim symphony of isolation. While the church's role in enforcing segregation for lepers is well documented, some historians still debate the exact uniformity and strictness of these exclusionary practices across different medieval regions. Interaction with the healthy world was minimal and fraught with fear. If you ventured into a town which was often forbidden, you had to ring your clapper, warning people of your approach, forcing them to avert their eyes and maintain a wide berth. No one would touch you. No one would share food with you. You were seen as unclean, a walking embodiment of sin or divine displeasure. Imagine the crushing loneliness, the profound sense of being utterly untouchable, an outcast even in your own family's eyes. The treatment for leprosy was non-existent. Medieval physicians had no understanding of the bacterial cause and no effective cure. Remedies were often based on superstition, prayer, herbal concoctions, or desperate, unproven practices. You would live with the slow, relentless progression of the disease, watching your own body betray you, knowing there was no hope for recovery. Your life would be a long, drawn-out process of physical and social decay, a testament to divine judgment's cruelty. This deep fear of leprosy profoundly shaped medieval society. It led to strict public health measures, though misguided in their understanding of contagion, strong moral condemnations, and the widespread practice of social exclusion. The leper became a potent symbol of fear and disgust, a constant reminder of human vulnerability to disease and the swift, brutal nature of medieval societal judgment. So, as you reflect on the challenges of medieval life, remember the agonizing reality of leprosy, social stigma, slow decay. It was a terrifying, disfiguring disease that condemned its victims to a living death, isolating them from all human contact and forcing them to endure a horrifying physical deterioration. A testament to the intersection of medical ignorance and profound social cruelty. It truly makes you appreciate modern medicine and our understanding of infectious diseases, doesn't it? You've explored the agonizing physical and social decay of leprosy, but while some diseases brought dramatic symptoms, others were silent, insidious killers, constantly present and ready to claim lives, particularly those weakened by poverty and malnutrition. Dysentery, the flux of death. This common medieval affliction, fueled by pervasive unsanitary conditions, was a brutal and often fatal intestinal infection that swept through communities with terrifying regularity. Imagine your medieval village. Life is lived in close proximity to humans, livestock, and their waste. There's no clean, running water piped into homes. Your drinking water comes from a communal well, a stream, or a local pond. This water, crucial for survival, is almost certainly contaminated. Human and animal waste, discarded food scraps, and general refuse would often find their way into these water sources, especially after a heavy rain. The very ground you walk on, often covered in mud and refuse, contributes to the spread of filth. This pervasive lack of sanitation created a perfect breeding ground for the bacteria like Shigella or Salmonella and parasites that cause dysentery. You didn't need to be near a major city, your own village, with its open latrines if they existed at all. Lack of hand washing and communal living was a constant source of infection. Imagine eating a meal with unwashed hands, or drinking water directly from a bucket, completely unaware that you were inviting deadly pathogens into your body. The symptoms of dysentery were horrifying and debilitating. It began with a sudden onset of severe diarrhea, often accompanied by fever, abdominal cramps, and tenesmus, a painful, ineffective urge to defecate. But the truly terrifying aspect was the presence of blood and mucus in the stool. Imagine suffering from relentless, agonizing bowel movements, your body racked with pain, expelling not just waste, but the very essence of your life force. This was the flux of death, a visible, terrifying sign of your body rapidly wasting away. The rapid and extreme dehydration was the primary cause of death, especially for children and the elderly, whose bodies were less able to cope with fluid loss. Imagine a child, already weakened by malnutrition, succumbing to endless diarrhea, their eyes sunken, their skin clammy, their small body rapidly shriveling. You'd witness dozens of your neighbors and family members suffering from this agonizing ailment, their strength draining away with each bowel movement, often leading to death in a matter of days. While the exact mortality rates varied by specific pathogen and population, dysentery was a leading cause of death in medieval Europe, particularly among infants and during periods of famine or war, as indicated by skeletal analysis showing signs of severe childhood stress and a general lack of sanitation in archaeological contexts. There was no understanding of intravenous fluids or rehydration therapy. Medieval physicians and healers might try various herbal remedies, offer thin gruel, or resort to bloodletting, but these were largely ineffective against the relentless fluid loss. Prayer was often the only recourse for desperate families, begging for divine intervention as their loved ones withered before their eyes. The crowded living conditions in medieval villages and towns further exacerbated the spread of dysentery. In longhouses where humans and animals lived in close proximity, or in densely packed urban tenements, an outbreak could sweep through a community like wildfire. Shared communal spaces, communal eating, and the close physical contact ensured that once the disease appeared, it rarely spared anyone. This constant threat of dysentery profoundly impacted daily life. It wasn't just an episodic illness, it was a recurrent nightmare, a constant presence that could erupt at any time, especially during warmer months when bacteria thrived. The pervasive fear of it meant that even healthy individuals lived with an underlying anxiety, knowing that their own water source or their neighbor's unwashed hands could suddenly bring the flux of death to their doorstep. The economic impact was also severe. A village crippled by an outbreak of dysentery could not work its fields, leading to further hardship and potential famine. So, as you reflect on the challenges of medieval life, remember the invisible terror that lurked in every unwashed hand and every communal well. Dysentery, the flux of death, was a horrifyingly common and deadly intestinal infection, a grim testament to the pervasive lack of sanitation and medical knowledge in medieval Europe. It truly makes you appreciate clean drinking water and modern sanitation, doesn't it? You've explored the disfiguring terror of smallpox, but while some diseases brought dramatic symptoms, others were silent, insidious killers, constantly present and ready to claim lives, particularly those weakened by poverty and malnutrition. Dysentery, the flux of death. This common medieval affliction, fueled by pervasive unsanitary conditions, was a brutal and often fatal intestinal infection that swept through communities with terrifying regularity. Imagine your medieval village. Life is lived in close proximity to humans, livestock, and their waste. There's no clean, running water piped into homes. Your drinking water comes from a communal well, a stream, or a local pond. This water, crucial for survival, is almost certainly contaminated. Human and animal waste, discarded food scraps, and general refuse would often find their way into these water sources, especially after a heavy rain. The very ground you walk on, often covered in mud and refuse, contributes to the spread of filth. This pervasive lack of sanitation created a perfect breeding ground for the bacteria like Shigella or Salmonella and parasites that cause dysentery. You didn't need to be near a major city, your own village, with its open latrines if they existed at all. Lack of hand washing and communal living was a constant source of infection. Imagine eating a meal with unwashed hands, or drinking water directly from a bucket, completely unaware that you were inviting deadly pathogens into your body. The symptoms of dysentery were horrifying and debilitating. It began with a sudden onset of severe diarrhea, often accompanied by fever, abdominal cramps, and tenesmus, a painful, ineffective urge to defecate. But the truly terrifying aspect was the presence of blood and mucus in the stool. Imagine suffering from relentless, agonizing bowel movements, your body racked with pain, expelling not just waste but the very essence of your life force. This was the flux of death, a visible, terrifying sign of your body rapidly wasting away. The rapid and extreme dehydration was the primary cause of death, especially for children and the elderly, whose bodies were less able to cope with fluid loss. Imagine a child, already weakened by malnutrition, succumbing to endless diarrhea, their eyes sunken, their skin clammy, their small body rapidly shriveling. You'd witness dozens of your neighbors and family members suffering from this agonizing ailment, their strength draining away with each bowel movement, often leading to death in a matter of days. While the exact mortality rates varied by specific pathogen and population, dysentery was a leading cause of death in medieval Europe, particularly among infants and during periods of famine or war, as indicated by skeletal analysis showing signs of severe childhood stress and a general lack of sanitation in archaeological contexts. There was no understanding of intravenous fluids or rehydration therapy. Medieval physicians and healers might try various herbal remedies, offer thin gruel, or resort to bloodletting, but these were largely ineffective against the relentless fluid loss. Prayer was often the only recourse for desperate families, begging for divine intervention as their loved ones withered before their eyes. The crowded living conditions in medieval villages and towns further exacerbated the spread of dysentery. In longhouses where humans and animals lived in close proximity, or in densely packed urban tenements, an outbreak could sweep through a community like wildfire. Shared communal spaces, communal eating, and the close physical contact ensured that once the disease appeared, it rarely spared anyone. This constant threat of dysentery profoundly impacted daily life. It wasn't just an episodic illness, it was a recurrent nightmare, a constant presence that could erupt at any time, especially during warmer months when bacteria thrived. The pervasive fear of it meant that even healthy individuals lived with an underlying anxiety, knowing that their own water source or their neighbor's unwashed hands could suddenly bring the flux of death to their doorstep. The economic impact was also severe. A village crippled by an outbreak of dysentery could not work its fields, leading to further hardship and potential famine. So, as you reflect on the challenges of medieval life, remember the invisible terror that lurked in every unwashed hand and every communal well. Dysentery, the flux of death, was a horrifyingly common and deadly intestinal infection, a grim testament to the pervasive lack of sanitation and medical knowledge in medieval Europe. It truly makes you appreciate clean drinking water and modern sanitation, doesn't it? You've faced the agonizing flux of death from dysentery. But while many medieval diseases were caused by bacteria or viruses, some terrifying afflictions stemmed from a more insidious, food-related source: ergotism, the holy fire's agony. This horrifying poisoning from contaminated rye could cause agonizing pain, hallucinations, and even gangrene, a terrifying and often fatal ordeal. Imagine yourself in a medieval village, particularly during a wet, cold summer and autumn. Conditions ripe for fungal growth. Your staple food, the very staff of life, is rye bread. Rye was a common and hardy grain, especially in cooler, wetter climates, and a cornerstone of the peasant diet. But sometimes, during damp conditions, a parasitic fungus called ergot claviceps purpurea would infect the rye grains, turning them black or purple and producing a number of potent alkaloids, powerful toxins. Unbeknownst to you, these contaminated rye grains would be harvested, milled into flour, and baked into your daily bread. There was no way to detect the contamination, no understanding of fungi or toxins. You would simply eat your bread, and slowly, insidiously, the poison would begin to take hold. Ergotism manifested in two terrifying forms, often referred to as holy fire or St. Anthony's fire, due to the burning sensations it caused and the belief that only divine intervention, often through St. Anthony, could cure it. The first, and perhaps most agonizing form, was gangrenous ergotism. Imagine a searing, burning pain in your limbs, as if they were literally on fire. This pain would be intense and relentless. As the poisoning progressed, the blood vessels in your extremities would constrict, cutting off blood supply. Your fingers and toes, then your hands and feet, would become cold, numb, and eventually turn black and shrivel. This was gangrene setting in. Imagine watching your own limbs slowly rot and fall off, completely without sensation. A horrifying process of self-amputation. The burning pain would eventually cease as the nerves died, but the visible decay was a constant, terrifying reminder of the poison consuming your body. While the common name St. Anthony's fire is widely known, historical texts and medical analyses confirm the distinct symptoms of ergotism, a specific poisoning from contaminated grain, distinguishing it from other burning sensation diseases. The second form was even more disturbing: convulsive ergotism. This variant primarily affected the nervous system. Imagine experiencing terrifying hallucinations, seeing bizarre visions, hearing strange voices, or suffering from delusions. You might descend into a state of madness, paranoid and disoriented, unable to distinguish reality from your poisoned nightmares. This could be accompanied by severe, painful convulsions and muscle spasms, causing your limbs to twist and writhe uncontrollably, a terrifying spectacle for onlookers who would believe you were possessed by demons. Imagine your body contorting violently, your mind trapped in a terrifying, vivid hallucination, your screams echoing through the longhouse. The symptoms of ergotism were often misinterpreted by medieval people. The burning sensation was attributed to fire, divine or demonic. The convulsions and madness were seen as possession, a sign of witchcraft, or divine punishment for sin. This misinterpretation led to more suffering, as victims were subjected to exorcisms, torturous attempts to drive out the demons, or even accusations of heresy, rather than receiving any genuine medical care. Imagine being accused of witchcraft while your body was literally being consumed by poison. There was no cure. Medieval physicians had no understanding of toxicology or the fungal nature of the disease. They might try bloodletting, herbal remedies, or prayers, all to no avail. Once the poisoning took hold, the outcome was often fatal, or if you survived, you would be left permanently disfigured, suffering from neurological damage or missing limbs. Outbreaks of ergotism would occur in epidemics, particularly after long, damp growing seasons that favored the ergot fungus. Entire villages could be affected, transforming a community into a scene of mass agony, convulsions, and madness. The sight of dozens of people suffering from holy fire, their limbs blackened, their bodies contorted, their minds lost to hallucinations, must have been a terrifying spectacle, further cementing the medieval belief in supernatural forces and divine wrath. So, as you enjoy your next piece of delicious, safely prepared bread, remember the terrifying medieval reality of ergotism, the holy fire's agony? It was a horrifying, insidious poisoning from contaminated rye. A stark reminder that even the most basic sustenance could become a source of unimaginable torment, leaving its victims to endure burning pain, disfigurement, and terrifying hallucinations. It truly makes you appreciate modern food safety regulations, doesn't it? You've explored the excruciating agony of ergotism, a terrifying poison lurking in the daily bread. But beyond these dramatic, visible plagues, there was a more insidious, pervasive killer, silently claiming lives across all social strata, often with a slow, agonizing decline: tuberculosis, the White Plague's whisper. This chronic wasting disease was an ever-present threat in medieval Europe, turning coughs into death sentences. Imagine yourself in a medieval household, whether a peasant's longhouse or a lord's castle. You hear a persistent cough from a family member, perhaps a young adult. At first, it's just a cough, a common affliction in damp, smoky dwellings. But as weeks turn into months, the cough deepens, becoming hacking and persistent. This is the insidious start of tuberculosis, or consumption as it was often called, known as the White Plague for the pallor it brought to its victims. Tuberculosis, caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis, primarily affected the lungs, though it could spread to bones, joints, and other organs. Its slow progression made it particularly cruel. Imagine the initial symptoms of persistent cough, often accompanied by a low-grade fever, night sweats that would drench your sleeping furs, and a gradual, relentless loss of appetite and weight. You'd feel perpetually tired, utterly drained of energy, your body slowly wasting away. As the disease advanced, the cough would become more severe, producing sputum that might contain blood. Your breathing would become labored, your chest constantly aching, the fever would intensify, and the night sweats would leave you shivering and exhausted. Imagine trying to perform strenuous farm labor or fulfill duties in a bustling household while your lungs are slowly being eaten away by the disease, your body becoming weaker and weaker with each passing day. For medieval people, the cause of tuberculosis was a mystery. They attributed it to bad air miasma, imbalances of humors, or even divine punishment. There was no understanding of bacteria or contagion. This lack of knowledge meant that affected individuals continued to live in close proximity to their families, unknowingly spreading the airborne bacteria through their coughs and sneezes. The crowded and unsanitary conditions common in medieval homes and villages provided ideal environments for the disease to spread relentlessly. While some ancient texts hinted at the contagious nature of consumption, a clear scientific understanding of tuberculosis as a bacterial infection transmissible through air did not emerge until centuries later, leaving medieval communities largely helpless against its spread. The disease was particularly prevalent among the young and the old, and those weakened by malnutrition or other illnesses. A poor harvest or a bout of dysentery could render someone particularly vulnerable to contracting and succumbing to tuberculosis. Children, especially, were tragically susceptible, often showing signs of the disease in their bones, which can be seen in archaeological remains. The insidious nature of tuberculosis meant that victims would often suffer for months, even years, before finally succumbing. This long, drawn-out decline was agonizing for both the afflicted and their families. You'd witness a loved one slowly waste away, their once vibrant body becoming gaunt, their skin pale, their strength draining, until they were little more than a shadow of their former self. The hope for recovery would slowly fade, replaced by a grim acceptance of the inevitable. There was no effective treatment. Medieval remedies might include herbal poultices to soothe coughs, special diets, or prayers to saints. However, none of these could combat the underlying bacterial infection. Physicians, if available, would be powerless. The best advice was often rest and good nutrition, luxuries rarely available to the common peasant struggling for daily survival. Many would seek pilgrimage to shrines of saints believed to cure specific ailments, a desperate plea for divine intervention. The White Plague was a constant presence in medieval society, a silent killer that permeated every community. It left a lasting mark on literature and art, often associated with a romanticized fragility, but its reality was one of immense suffering and profound loss. It was a disease that reminded everyone of life's fragility, a constant whisper of death in the background of daily existence. So, as you reflect on the tapestry of medieval life, remember the pervasive, unseen threat that silently claimed so many lives. Tuberculosis, the White Plague's whisper, was a horrifying, slow-wasting disease, a grim testament to the medical ignorance and challenging living conditions of the era. It truly makes you appreciate modern antibiotics and our understanding of respiratory health, doesn't it? You've witnessed the slow, agonizing decline brought by tuberculosis. But beyond the major plagues and chronic killers, medieval Europe was a land where common, everyday ailments could become deadly, sweeping through communities with frightening regularity influenza and fevers. Constant threats. Without our modern understanding of viruses, hygiene, and supportive care, Even a common cold could turn into a death sentence. Imagine a sudden chill in the air, a familiar sensation that often heralded the arrival of the season of coughs and sneezes. A common cold might begin, or a mild fever, but in medieval Europe, this was not just an inconvenience. These seemingly ordinary illnesses, often forms of influenza, the flu, or other undifferentiated fevers, could quickly escalate into fatal conditions, particularly for the young, the old, and the already weakened. Symptoms like fever, chills, body aches, headaches, and respiratory congestion would spread rapidly through a village or city. Imagine yourself shivering under thin blankets, your head throbbing, your body aching as if you'd been beaten. Your throat would be raw, your chest heavy with congestion. There was no concept of a virus. These ailments were attributed to bad air miasma, an imbalance of humors, or even divine displeasure. The danger of these common fevers lay in their secondary complications. A simple flu could quickly devolve into pneumonia, especially in damp, smoky, and poorly ventilated longhouses or crowded urban tenements. The weakened immune system of a medieval peasant, often battling malnutrition, parasitic infections, or chronic exposure, made them incredibly vulnerable. Imagine fighting for breath, your lungs burning, as the illness tightened its grip, knowing there was little anyone could do. Dehydration was another major killer, especially with high fevers and any accompanying diarrhea, a frequent problem given the ubiquitous unsanitary conditions. Without easy access to clean water or understanding of rehydration, prolonged fever could simply drain the life force from a body. You'd see children, their small bodies particularly susceptible, quickly succumb to these seemingly minor ailments, their vital fluids simply evaporating. The rapid spread of these illnesses was facilitated by the crowded and unsanitary living conditions. People lived in close proximity to each other, to their animals, and to their waste. Shared communal spaces, lack of personal hygiene, and constant physical contact ensured that once a fever entered a community, it rarely spared anyone. There was no social distancing, no understanding of airborne transmission. You'd simply cough, sneeze, and spread the illness to everyone around you. Medical care for these common fevers was largely ineffective. Medieval physicians and local healers might offer warm drinks, herbal concoctions, or rudimentary comfort measures. However, without knowledge of specific pathogens, antibiotics, or even effective pain relief beyond crude analgesics, they were largely powerless. Bloodletting, a common medieval cure-all, would further weaken an already sick individual, potentially hastening their demise. Prayer was often the most powerful and accessible remedy, a desperate plea for divine intervention as the fever raged. While specific mortality rates for common fevers are hard to isolate from broader causes of death in historical records, the pervasive descriptions of seasonal illnesses and their often fatal outcomes in medieval chronicles highlight their significant impact on overall life expectancy. The sheer ubiquity of these fevers meant that life was a constant cycle of recovery and relapse. You might survive one bout of flu, only to be weakened and left susceptible to the next. This continuous battle against common illnesses drained energy, reduced productivity, and contributed to a general state of poor health throughout the population. It shaped the rhythm of life, determining who lived and who died, subtly but relentlessly. For a family struggling for survival, the illness of a single member could be catastrophic. If the farmer or the main household manager fell ill, the fields might go untended, the animals uncared for, and the family plunged into deeper poverty. These seemingly minor illnesses had major economic and social repercussions, further cementing the precariousness of medieval existence. So, as you reflect on the tapestry of medieval life, remember that beyond the dramatic plagues, the unseen threats of common illnesses were equally terrifying. Influenza and fevers, constant threats, relentlessly stalked every corner of medieval Europe, turning everyday ailments into potential death sentences. A grim testament to the fragility of life in a world without modern medical interventions. It truly makes you appreciate a simple flu shot and a bottle of acetaminophen, doesn't it? You've witnessed the devastating impact of influenza and other fevers. But the spread of these and countless other horrifying diseases in medieval Europe wasn't just a matter of unlucky chance. It was directly facilitated by the very way people lived unsanitary living. Disease's breeding ground, the pervasive filth, rudimentary hygiene, and crowded conditions were not merely uncomfortable. They created a perfect, constant environment for pathogens to thrive and epidemics to rage unchecked. Imagine yourself in any medieval European settlement, whether a bustling city or a small village. The most striking thing to a modern observer would be the overwhelming stench. There was no organized waste disposal system. Human and animal waste was often simply tossed into the streets or into open cesspits. Imagine walking through narrow, unpaved alleyways, ankle-deep in mud, refuse and excrement, the air thick with its putrid odor. This wasn't just unpleasant, it was a constant source of infection, teeming with bacteria and attracting disease-carrying vermin. Access to clean water was incredibly limited. Your drinking water would come from communal wells, rivers, or streams. These sources were almost universally contaminated by runoff from overflowing privies, animal pens, and garbage. Imagine dipping your bucket into a well, completely unaware that it was filled with unseen microscopic killers. This contaminated water was a primary vector for waterborne diseases like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid, constantly introducing pathogens into the population. Personal hygiene was rudimentary at best. Bathing was infrequent, often seen as a luxury or even discouraged by some religious interpretations for periods. Clothing, often made of coarse wool or linen, was rarely washed thoroughly and would harbor dirt, sweat, and a thriving population of lice and fleas. Imagine the constant itch of body lice, a daily reality for virtually everyone, regardless of social status. These parasites were not just annoying, fleas in particular were crucial vectors for the bubonic plague, transmitting the Yersinia pestis bacterium from rats to humans. The housing conditions were a disease incubator. In rural villages, longhouses often housed humans and livestock under the same roof, separated by only a low partition. This close proximity meant constant exposure to animal waste, dander, and diseases that could jump between species. In crowded cities, multiple families might live crammed into small, poorly ventilated rooms in multi-story tenements. Insula, sharing beds, food, and air. Imagine a family of 5 or more sleeping on a single straw mattress, breathing stagnant air, and sharing their space with rats and insects. These conditions were ideal for the rapid spread of airborne diseases like tuberculosis, influenza, and smallpox. While precise archaeological data on medieval indoor air quality is challenging to obtain, historical accounts and the prevalence of respiratory diseases strongly suggest chronic exposure to smoke and poor ventilation in medieval dwellings. Food preparation and storage also contributed to unsanitary conditions. Without refrigeration, food spoilage was a constant threat. Meat and dairy products could quickly become breeding grounds for bacteria, leading to food poisoning. Kitchens were often smoky, attracting flies, and food was often handled with unwashed hands, further introducing pathogens. The concept of waste management as we understand it simply didn't exist. Garbage was routinely thrown into the streets, rivers, or on middens. Communal refuse heaps outside homes. These heaps attracted rats, mice, and other pests, which then carried diseases into homes and food stores. The sight and smell of decaying organic matter were a constant part of medieval urban and rural life. This pervasive lack of sanitation meant that medieval Europe was a continent-sized disease breeding ground. Pathogens thrived in the constant filth, the crowded living spaces, and the absence of basic hygienic practices. Every interaction, every meal, every drink of water carried an inherent risk. The result was a population constantly battling illness, with high mortality rates, particularly among children, and recurring epidemics that could decimate communities in a matter of weeks. So, As you reflect on the challenges of medieval life, remember that many of its horrifying diseases were not random acts of fate. They were direct consequences of a lifestyle where unsanitary living created the perfect conditions for disease's breeding ground. It's a stark reminder that even basic cleanliness and proper sanitation are monumental advancements that have fundamentally transformed human health and longevity. It truly makes you appreciate your clean tap water and municipal waste collection, doesn't it? You've confronted the overwhelming filth, the precarious hygiene, and the crowded conditions that fueled disease in medieval Europe. As we conclude our exploration of these horrifying medieval illnesses, let's reflect on a world of sickness legacy of fear. Disease was not just an occasional misfortune. It was a constant, pervasive force that profoundly shaped medieval life, leaving a deep and lasting inheritance of fear, fatalism, and a desperate search for meaning in suffering. Imagine living in medieval Europe, knowing that death could strike swiftly and indiscriminately from an unseen enemy. This wasn't a distant threat, it was a daily reality. The Black Death alone wiped out a third of the population. Smallpox disfigured countless faces, dysentery ravaged families, tuberculosis slowly consumed its victims, ergotism brought agonizing pain and madness. This omnipresence of disease forged a profoundly different human experience than our own. The most profound legacy is the pervasive culture of fear. Life was short, unpredictable, and often ended in agonizing pain. Every cough, every fever, every rash carried the terrifying potential of a swift demise. This constant anxiety permeated every aspect of life, from how people interacted or avoided each other during epidemics to how they planned for the future, or more accurately, how they struggled to plan it all. Imagine living your life with a constant, nagging dread, knowing that your children might not survive childhood, or that a sudden plague could wipe out your entire village. This fear, coupled with a fundamental lack of medical understanding, led to a deeply rooted fatalism and reliance on divine will. When disease struck, people often believed it was a punishment from God for their sins, or the work of demons or witches. Medieval medicine, based on theories of humors and rudimentary remedies, was largely powerless against major epidemics. Therefore, the primary recourse was prayer, pilgrimages, penance, and desperate pleas to saints for intercession. Imagine the profound helplessness of watching a loved one die, believing it to be God's inescapable will, with no scientific explanation or effective cure. While religious interpretations of disease were common, some medieval medical practitioners did attempt empirical observations and treatments. Though their understanding was limited by the prevailing scientific paradigms, leading to ongoing historical debate about the balance between medical and spiritual approaches, the devastating impact of disease also profoundly shaped medieval society and economy. Mass deaths, like those from the Black Death, led to severe labor shortages, disrupting agricultural cycles, collapsing trade networks, and fundamentally altering feudal relationships. Entire villages could be abandoned, fields left fallow, and social structures strained to their breaking point. These demographic shocks reshaped the very foundations of Europe, leading to long-term changes in labor relations, land ownership, and urban development. Disease also had a profound impact on psychology and art. The ubiquity of death and suffering is reflected in medieval art, particularly in macabre imagery like the Dance of Death, where skeletons lead people from all walks of life in a grim procession, symbolizing mortality's inescapable embrace. Funerary practices, religious beliefs, and popular superstitions were all shaped by the constant presence of illness and death. It created a collective consciousness acutely aware of life's fragility. Finally, the horrifying diseases of medieval Europe serve as a stark reminder of how far humanity has come. Our modern understanding of germ theory, sanitation, vaccinations, antibiotics, and public health infrastructure has fundamentally transformed human longevity and quality of life. The plagues that decimated medieval populations are now largely preventable or treatable, This medical revolution, born of scientific inquiry and technological advancement, is perhaps the greatest legacy of those horrifying times. A powerful testament to our collective journey from a world of sickness to one where we can often outrun the Grim Reaper. So, as you lay in your comfortable bed, shielded by modern medicine and sanitation, remember the constant shadow that hung over medieval life. The horrifying diseases of that era were not just medical facts, they were profound shapers of culture, economy, and human experience, leaving a lasting legacy of fear, suffering, and a desperate yearning for health. It makes you incredibly grateful for every modern medical marvel, doesn't it? All right, as the last echoes of our journey through the horrifying diseases of medieval Europe fade into the quiet of the night, it's time to gently bring our minds back to the present. You've witnessed the terrifying plagues, felt the chill of their fear, and grappled with the profound fragility of life in a world without modern medicine. It's a powerful reminder that history, in its quietest corners, often reveals the most poignant truths about human resilience and the incredible progress we've made. Let the images of horrific plagues, incurable pain, and helplessness in the face of fate fade away, giving way to the quiet peace that surrounds you. The stench of the city and the heavy air of death fade away, giving way to the familiar comfort of your own space. Let any lingering thoughts of illness and death drift away, replaced by a sense of relaxation and peaceful reflection. The struggles and losses of those who lived in the Middle Ages are now, temporarily, part of your understanding, enriching your sense of the history and value of modern health and medicine. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes, know that the stories of the past are always here, waiting patiently to be rediscovered whenever you seek a gentle escape into the depths of time. But now, the journey is complete. Rest easy, knowing that another story has been revealed. Gently, just for you.